it seems to me that my presentation is a little bit like a bridge to the next session, to the more practical attempts to connect our theological fundaments and what we are doing as church and as theologians in the public. Yes, we heard already a little bit about. We already heard about the discussions about secularization, about desecularization. Religion and church have been expected for a long time to disappear from the public space and to restrict itself at least to the private sphere, to private religious praxis. And yet, opposing all predictions, and as we all can see and talk a little about it, nor religion, neither the church, disappeared, but came back and stayed in the public space. There are several dimensions of religion in the public space, I guess, and I do not want to talk about them all. Religion was and is supposed to provide compensation and meaning in times of crisis or social trouble. Religion was and is supposed to, you can click, supposed to provide compensation and meaning in times of crisis or social trouble. Not at least public religion is made visible through the political manipulation of religiosity. There is, I think, no need to elaborate on this topic here in Ukraine, and yet this is also the case for Europe, in Germany, where I come from, or also in the USA. Being aware of this political manipulation, the next question is, and what is the reaction of the church? What are we do with this manipulation, with this use of religiosity and the church? How is the church coming to terms with the demand, with the public demand of a church voice and with the manipulation? Christian religion, for sure, always and fundamentally transcend the private. It's the mission of the church to be public. It's the mission of the church to act within and to create society in which she lives. And it's the mission of the church to take the public, even the secular public, serious as a place of God's love and action. In the tradition of the Second Vaticanum, which we already heard about, there's no battle between the world and the church, but both are places of God's love for the people. So naturally, the world, the public, is the first place for theology. So for us as theologians, the question is not whether the church is or shall be public, but how she goes public. To put it shortly, we have a lot to share with society. We heard about it already. We know, we the church theologians at most, know what our society, our world should look like. And we have the task to change the world. Yet it doesn't seem like a lot of the world is listening to us. As if the answers that the church and the theologians provide, they don't fit the questions coming from society. And even more, I would say the high number of people, at least in Germany, deliberately leaving the church at the moment, points to the bitter fact that the answers the church on public issues provides do not answer even the questions of its own believers. So what we have to talk about, in my perspective, from a theological point of view, is the question of language and true dialogue. And with true dialogue, I mean not the rather sectarian monologue of truth, which some representatives of the church like to present as the church's dialogue with the world, since we talk to you and you have to listen and to understand that we have the truth. And it doesn't, and it also do not mean, do not mean a pure adaptation of secular issues or language with the aim to fit in just and to dismiss theological issues. This true dialogue presumes a firm theological background as well as an openness for what is going on in the world. And I'm convinced that Christians, or at least Catholic theology, has already a theological discipline engaging with and developing this dialogue. And I'm also a little bit skeptical about the new boom for public theology or also political theology. I guess in Catholic tradition at least, we have the tradition of social ethics, of theological social ethics, and I guess if we would use this tool well enough, we would find a lot of answers to the questions raised also at this conference. I would like to illustrate this dialogue I speak about by some practical examples, both successful and less successful, And both from my Catholic background and from the Orthodox background on which I'm doing my research in the center where I work. So we go on with the next slides. I would like to illustrate two places of encounter where the church reacted on public issues. The first place of encounter is the refugee crisis in Germany. The public issue is, this is a topic of and has been a topic of very high interest in Germany, in the German society since 2015, and I guess you all have heard about it, that we have this huge challenge of integrating, of welcoming a huge amount of refugees in Germany. Please. This is, I apologize in German, but you can see it's a poll from 2016, January, where we see that the question of refugees, of asylum, of migration is the topic of the most public interest in society, with 73%. The next topics are work, economics, peace, Europe, crisis of Europe, education, internal security, climate change, and so on. They are all minor topics. The most high topic at this moment was the refugee crisis. There was a huge amount of populism arousing around these difficulties, which the society and German state was challenged with. And in this discourse, in this populist discourse, we very often heard quasi-Christian arguments. The end of the Christian Abendland. Yeah, we will end up in a Muslim state with Muslim law and Muslim behavior. And this is the end of Christianity and of our used Christian Occident world. So what was the answer of the church in this situation? Please. The church gave yes, the next one. Go. The church published in February 2016, the German Conference of Bishops published guidelines for the German Catholic Church commitment to refugees. This is the main document. There were a lot of statements on this issue, of course, but this was the main document published in several languages to show what the church's official position is on this issue. And I have provided a short citation from this text, which shows very good what I'm talking about when church tries to really go in a dialogue with what the public issue is. The high number, I cited, the high number of refugees poses major challenges to our country. Simple solutions are not in sight. In this situation, many fellow citizens are seized with fear, resentment is breeding. But, and this I would make here the emphasis, we Christians must not let ourselves infected by this. Today, more than in the past, the gospel of mercy troubles our conscience, Pope Francis says, and wants us to take good note of that. Today, the globalization of charity can also be found in our immediate vicinity. The hopes and fears of the many people seeking protection are in a special way also the hopes and fears of the church. End of the quote. What we see here is not an answer not to take the fear on ourselves, not to embrace this fear of the new and of the unknown which is coming and which is challenging us, but the church has a clear option for the poor and the oppressed. And in this situation, the poor and the oppressed are the refugees and not the society being a little bit troubled by something new coming to them and not being able to find a convincing answer to this. So the church position is hope, is engagement, it is empowerment for those who are oppressed. I think that this is a very good example to see what happens if church is really in a dialogue with what is going on. It really looks at the situation and not just reacting with some solutions she has already done several years ago. A next example for this dialogue, which I mean, comes from the Orthodox sphere, and I even don't want to talk very much about it here because it's your home country and your home issue. This is the question of Maidan, and you can go forward. I have this one picture with some very well-known people also sitting in this room. The Maidan was, by no doubt the biggest public issue for Ukrainian society in the last years or even maybe decades. There were some public issues raised like stop corruption, opening to Europe, and empowerment of the civil society. And the church answer was not, as so many used to know, a word about going back, don't starting a revolution. Revolution is always bad. We have to hold back and we have to keep calm. The reaction of the church and of parts of the church, in fact, were to go there and to be with the people. And I have a quotation which I very apologize because I can't translate it because it's Ukrainian, but you all understand it, so this is not the problem. It's Georgi Kovalenko, a priest from Orthodox Church in Kiev. You all know him. He stands here with the cross. And what we see in this quotation is that the church, and he was at this moment, he was in an official position. He was not only someone from the church, from some believer talking to the world. We see that the church has the position with the people. It's addressing the hopes and the fears of the people, but it shows also the meaning of religious belief for the life outside the church. He refers to the 10 commandments of God, and showing that this had something to do with what is going on here in our life. We shall not go back to the church and just listen to these commandments in the field of our church and of our religious life. This has something to do with what is going on in the public society. There is, of course, a demand for peace and non-violence in this moment. And for me, the question, of course, the question to you and the question why I'm very happy to be here and to hear all the next presentations too is there a continuation and a theological elaboration of this initial moment of social ethics within the Orthodox Church of Ukraine? I guess yesterday I heard some presentations in the first section, and they show me already that there is an impressive engagement, with theological engagement, with the questions raised at Maidan. And for me, this is very encouraging to see, and I would like to empower you and encourage you to go on, because I guess this is the way the church can really come in a fruitful dialogue with society and not only stand by and hold the monologue because she knows the right answers. Yet, of course, there are some misunderstandings, and I would like to show two examples for misunderstandings in the dialogue of the church, or in the so-called dialogue of the church with society. The first misunderstanding, again from the Catholic and German context, is about gender ideology. The public issue raised with this issue is the growing visibility of diversity, of ways of life, and the scientific and also theological attempt to frame these changes, to find the language to talk about this and to enclose it. So, for example, gender studies, but also we have in Catholic faculties in Germany theological gender studies or theological feminist theology and so on. The answer of the church has been or is widely known. It's not homogeneous, you have to say. There are very different answers. But if you look at the reaction of the Bishops' Conference in Germany, or also at the Vatican, at the answers of the Vatican, and some very popular speakers. So we have the picture here. You can see Gabriele Kubi, which is quite a very popular speaker in Eastern Europe, and at Bishops' Conferences wide about Europe about this issue. Her and the Bishop's answer is the critique within church and theology. They accuse gender theories to be dismissing sex, opposing the natural differences. We have no clear sexes already. We have something huge, not understandable. There are no natural differences between men and women. And there is inventing a new human beings, a new anthropology by this gender studies or gender ideology. Here you have the quotation from Pope Benedict, which I even want to read it all because it shows what I said. The accusation is gender ideology poses a new anthropology on us and on our church. The main opponent of this theory is Judith Butler, but there is, of course, a very wide range. And the first problem in this dialogue, I even don't want to call it dialogue, because the first problem is the gender critics don't listen and read really what they are criticizing. I'm not sure whether Gabriele Kubi has read Judith Butler and talked to her in real to understand what she's talking about. Because nobody in gender theory, first, there is not one gender theory. There's not one huge ideology telling how to go on and how to use the word gender. We have such a wide range of gender theories and gender studies, which are worth looking at and going in dialogue with them to understand. Then you see that Judith Butler, for example, does not advocate an end of sexes, but the recognition of diversity and the recognition of boundaries in our own cultural frames of interpretation, how we understand to be man and woman. And does this reflect the reality women and men are living in? So this is something truly different, really different from what the critics are talking about. Acknowledging life experiences of humans which transcend determination by natural, so-called natural, heteronormative matrix. This is not about stopping sex. This is not about talking to you what men and women have to be like, or what men and women feel like if they feel like men and women. But it's about the minority of people who don't fit in these categories. And this is, I guess, a really Christian and theological, very worth-making distinction, because you grant dignity to people who were forced to assume themselves as not existent or wrong. So this is Christian, this is theology, to give a life, giving a possibility to live in dignity for all people, not only for those you feel that they are right, on the right side. So this project for recognition, which Judith Butler started, this is not about destroying existing forms and not a threat for people feeling themselves comfortable as men and women in traditional categories, but it's about to open a space of dignified life for those who don't fit there, who don't feel comfortable. By way of comment, I think that this issue, I don't want to elaborate further on it, but this issue of recognition and then critical attempt of our theological natural law teaching, this would also seriously help our church, the Catholic Church, to find convincing and accountable answers to the huge topic of sexual and spiritual abuse within the church. And the second short example for the misunderstandings which happen is from the Orthodox context, from Russian Orthodox Church. It's about peace and war, and the reality, the public issue is the reality of war and violence between Orthodox nations, between Ukraine and Russia, between Georgia and Russia several years ago. The church's answer, the Russian Orthodox Church's answer to this topic of peace and war is addressing the individual with a call for non-violence and addressing the state by legitimating military interventions, directly or non-directly. The misunderstanding I see here, you can go on. The misunderstanding, and next one too, the misunderstanding I see here is there is no reflection of the social categories of social justice, of the rule of law, of structural violence and power. There's no recognition of the fact that war is more than the individual responsibility of the sinful person, soldier or president. There's no theological engagement with the different and structural reasons for war. There's no critical distance to the state to do such a critical attempt to reasons for war. And there's no translation, and this is, I guess, a very important point, there's no translation of the theological understanding of sin, of sinfulness. Who in the world, who is not going every Sunday to church and not going, who understands what we mean by sin in theological categories? So there's no translation, and so this voice of the church remains unheard. The voice of the church with its tradition and theological paradigms of justice, of reconciliation. I do not say that the church, the Russian Orthodox Church, does not have this tradition, but it is not able to bring it into dialogue with what is happening in the society at the moment. Church is received, therefore, as a part of the conflict and not of the way to sustainable peace. So, as part of as conclusion, the dialogue instead of monologue I'm talking about, this is what social ethics, theological social ethics is about. I would just want to remember or tell you about one very important but almost forgotten, I guess sometimes, paradigm, theological principle of coming to terms with church and world from Medellin. Medellin was a big, huge conference after Second Vaticanum the Bishops' Conference to come to terms with the widely poverty and discrimination and oppression of the people of the society in in South America. And what they Theological started to think about methods how to come to terms with this. This is the so-called 3 steps of social thinking, of social theology. The first is to see, to observe, and this means crucial in this point is to listen and to understand what is really going on. And this means a fundamental engagement with social and human sciences. You can't do this only from a theological point of view. You have to talk and you have to listen to what social sciences are talking about and how they see and how they explain what is going on with the world. So this is the point of see and observe. The second step is judge. And this means that we go back to our theological fundamentals, that we know that we have to stay firmly on it, and to find proper theological judgment in the frame of Christian theology of what is going on in the world, to bring in contact and dialogue, the observations you made and the theological fundament you are standing on. And the third step is to act. That means not just to stay on the level of theological reasoning, but ethics always want to get practical. Ethics always seek praxis. So individual moral ethics as well as social ethics, they want to have a direct impact on the action of believers and of the church as whole. So as a conclusion, the last points, theological ethics, very shortly, they are, if you take this serious, they are always local, and by this they can't be doctrinal. You can't have a dogma of how social life should look like, because the world is different, local context is different, and you have to engage with this local context to go in a really true dialogue. Nevertheless, theological social ethics, they are normative. They don't go just into the social sciences and stay some form of social actor talking about this. We have a Christian theological message which makes our acting, our social ethics normative, with the points of the option, of the crucial, I think, option for the poor and for the oppressed. This is what we can't dismiss in our work. We have the social ethics, theological social ethics, they are self-reflective. They don't think that they have the right answers to anything, but they reflect that they are also part of some social context and some structures and systematic failures which make them not bearer of the truth, going to the people, so here is the truth and please do so and everything will be okay. And I guess at this point this is also very important to reflect on the connection of theology and the church. We have heard a lot about good ideas today about theology which knows and goes into the world and has a very, very clear vision of how the world should be. But can theology act without the church? And what do we do with the fact that the church does not answer our theological ideas of how it should like? The church cannot be credible if she is not in accordance to what theology tries to elaborate on. So I guess here is a very important point of self-criticism and of the question for us theologians to ask ourselves what we are thinking about as theologians to do with what the church is doing as institution in the world. And the last point is theological social ethics, they are fearless. And this is one, you could see it, the first examples, I guess. Church and theology in its dialogue with the world is often shaped by fear. We are very afraid of what is coming to us, and if we will be understood, and if we have an answer, people understood, and it's like the world outside us threatens our identity. But we shouldn't have this fear, I guess, because when we stand firmly in our theology, in our belief, why do we fear? Why do we fear a word, gender? How does it attract our identity that someone else thinks he's different? So we don't have to have fear, because if we want to have a dialogue, a real dialogue, fear is a very bad companion. And I guess the issue of social ethics is to go in a really open dialogue, fearless dialogue with the world and world social sciences. Thank you very much.